I'm Megan, 31, female. I work as a civil engineer, a job that's demanding but rewarding and one I'm proud of. It's a world of concrete, steel, and complex calculations, a world far removed from the complicated, often unspoken dynamics of my family. For years, I've navigated their subtle digs and not so subtle comparisons to my brother, Ryan, the artistic soul of the family. Little did they know, the very foundation of their comfortable life was being held up by the daughter they so often dismissed. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The text message from my mother, Emily, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon just as I was wrapping up a site inspection. It was cheerful, dotted with flower emojis, and completely oblivious to the stress of my work week. Family dinner on Friday, a little celebration is in order, don't be late. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. A celebration in my family usually meant one thing, another opportunity to praise my younger brother, Ryan. At 28, Ryan was still chasing his dream of becoming a renowned painter, a dream funded almost entirely by our parents. He lived at home, his art supplies and canvases filling the garage, his days spent waiting for inspiration to strike. Meanwhile, I had moved out at 22, put myself through a demanding engineering program, and was now managing multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. But in my family's eyes, I was the reliable, boring one, the one who had chosen a paycheck over passion. Friday arrived too quickly. I walked into my childhood home, the smell of roasted chicken and my mother's perfume filling the air. My father, David, was already at the dining table, a newspaper spread before him, though he wasn't reading it. He grunted a hello, his eyes flicking back to the headlines. My mother rushed out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Megan, you're here," she said, her smile a little too bright. "Ryan's just in the garage, in the zone, as he says. He'll be in soon." I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. "Smells great, Mom." We made small talk for a few minutes, the conversation circling around safe, uninteresting topics: the weather, a neighbor's new car, the rising price of groceries. It was a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance, a way to keep the peace until the main event. Ryan made his entrance. He finally emerged, a smudge of paint on his cheek and a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Hey, everyone. Sorry, I was just finishing up a piece. It's really speaking to me." My mother cooed, "Oh, darling, that's wonderful. We can't wait to see it." Dinner began, and with it, the familiar pattern. My father, who had been laid off from his sales manager job 6 months prior and was now forcibly retired, as he put it, asked Ryan about his latest artistic endeavors with an enthusiasm I rarely saw directed my way. My mother refilled Ryan's plate before he could even ask, praising his vision and courage for pursuing such a difficult path. I tried to interject, to share a story about a bridge project I was leading, but my words were quickly swallowed by the conversation, which inevitably veered back to Ryan. "The gallery owner downtown seemed really interested in my new series," he announced, puffing out his chest. "He said I have a unique voice." "Oh, that's incredible," my mother gushed, clapping her hands together. "We always knew you had it in you." I took a slow sip of water, the glass cool against my hand. The celebration, it turned out, was for Ryan's potential gallery showing. It was a celebration of a possibility, a dream, while my tangible, hard-earned achievements were treated as little more than a stable, unexciting reality. The meal continued like this, a steady stream of praise for Ryan and polite, dismissive questions for me. "Work is good, Megan?" my father would ask, his attention already drifting. "Still building roads and things?" I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just that they were proud of Ryan. It was the way their pride in him seemed to diminish me. It was the implication that my life, my choices, were somehow less worthy, less interesting. The roast chicken tasted bland, the mashed potatoes were gluey in my mouth. I was an outsider at my own family's table, a silent benefactor to a celebration that wasn't for me. As my mother brought out the dessert, a store-bought apple pie, she turned to me, her expression shifting slightly. "Megan, dear," she began, and I braced myself. Her tone had changed, a subtle shift from fawning to condescending. "We need to talk about your attitude lately." I blinked, caught off guard. "My attitude? Yes," she said, cutting a slice of pie with a little too much force. "You just seem so stressed all the time, so serious. You should try to be more like your brother, live a little. You're so focused on your career, you're going to miss out on life." I stared at her, my fork hovering over my plate. It was the classic backhanded compliment, the sweet poison of her concern. And then came the final blow, the words that would echo in my mind for the rest of the night. "Honestly, Megan," she said, shaking her head with a sigh of pity, "sometimes I look at you and I just see a failure. A failure to launch, to find joy, all that work for what?" The table fell silent. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. Ryan, for his part, had the decency to look down at his plate. But the words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A failure. The word bounced around in my head, a cruel and unjust verdict. I had done everything right, everything they had supposedly wanted for me. A good education, a stable career, financial independence. And yet here I was being called a failure by the very people I had been trying so hard to please. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. I think I should go, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My mother looked surprised, as if she couldn't understand why her constructive criticism would be met with anything other than grateful acceptance. But you haven't had any pie? I shook my head, grabbing my purse from the floor. I'm not hungry. As I walked to the door, my mother's voice followed me. Don't be so sensitive, Megan. We just worry about you. But I wasn't listening. The word failure was a drumbeat in my ears, a painful reminder that in their eyes I would never be enough. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through my tear-filled eyes. I had been called many things in my life, stubborn, determined, ambitious, but never a failure. And to hear it from my own mother in the home I had grown up in was a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. I walked into my empty apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the noisy, suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house. I sank onto my couch, the weight of her words pressing down on me, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry. I cried for the daughter they wanted me to be, the one I could never become. And I cried for the daughter I was, the one they refused to see. The weeks following that disastrous dinner were filled with a tense, brittle silence. My mother sent a few half-hearted texts, thinking of you, and let's have lunch soon, but I couldn't bring myself to reply with anything more than a non-committal okay. Her words had lodged themselves deep in my heart, a constant, painful reminder of the chasm between us. The barbed compliments, as I had come to call them, had been a staple of my upbringing. They were my mother's specialty, a way of expressing her disapproval under the guise of concern. That dress is lovely, Megan. It's amazing how they can make something so flattering in that size. Or, it's so brave of you to take on such a demanding job. Most women would want something a little less intense. Each one was a tiny paper cut, a small wound that over time had left me covered in scars. I remembered a particularly painful incident from my college graduation. I had just received my degree in civil engineering, graduating with honors. I was ecstatic, proud of my accomplishment. But when I found my parents in the crowd, my mother's first words were, "Well, you did it. I never thought you'd stick with something so unfeminine, but you look nice in your cap and gown." My father had simply nodded, his eyes already scanning the crowd for Ryan, who had shown up late and was trying to wave them down from across the field. My moment of triumph had been instantly deflated, reduced to a footnote in the ongoing saga of my brother's life. These memories, once just painful annoyances, now felt like clues in a larger puzzle. I started to see a pattern, a consistent effort to undermine my confidence, to keep me in my place as the lesser child. It was as if my success was a threat to the carefully constructed narrative of their family, the one where Ryan was the star and I was just a supporting character. One Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out some old boxes in my closet when I came across a photo album from my childhood. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. There I was, a gap-toothed 7-year-old, proudly holding up a Lego tower I had built. I remembered that day so clearly. I had spent hours on it, carefully balancing each block, creating a structure that was both intricate and stable. I had run to show my parents, my heart bursting with pride. My father had glanced at it, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before saying, "That's nice, honey. But you should be playing with your dolls." My mother had laughed, a light tinkling sound that still made my stomach clench. "Oh, let her be, David. She's always been a strange little thing." I closed the album, a fresh wave of hurt washing over me. It had always been there, this subtle, insidious campaign to steer me away from my natural inclinations, to mold me into a version of myself that they could understand, that they could control. My interest in math and science, my love of building and problem solving had been dismissed as strange and unfeminine. My ambition had been reframed as a character flaw, a sign that I was too serious and didn't know how to have fun. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that their criticism wasn't really about me at all. It was about them. It was about their own unfulfilled dreams, their own insecurities. My father, who had always wanted to be an architect but had settled for a career in sales, saw in me a reflection of the path he hadn't taken. My mother, who had given up her own aspirations to be a housewife, resented my independence, my refusal to follow the same traditional path. And then there was Ryan. He was their second chance, their do-over. He was the artist, the free spirit, the one who would achieve the creative success that had eluded them. They poured all of their hopes and dreams into him, propping him up on a pedestal of their own making. My success, my stability, my quiet competence didn't fit into that narrative. It was an inconvenient truth, a reminder that there was more than one way to live a life to find fulfillment. As I sat there on my bedroom floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, a new feeling began to take root in my heart. It was a cold, hard anger, a righteous fury that burned away the years of self-doubt and hurt. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, to be seen and valued for who I was. But now I realized that their approval was a moving target, a prize that would always be just out of my reach. And for the first time, I didn't care. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their praise. I had built a life for myself, a life that was strong and stable and true. And if they couldn't see that, if they couldn't appreciate the woman I had become, then that was their loss, not mine. The anger was clarifying, cleansing. It was a catalyst for change. I stood up, dusting off my hands, and made a decision. I would no longer be the silent, accommodating daughter. I would no longer shrink myself to fit into their narrow, suffocating expectations. I would be myself, unapologetically and without reservation. And if that meant a confrontation, if that meant shattering the fragile peace of our family, then so be it. The foundation of our relationship was already cracked, the facade already crumbling. It was time to bring the whole thing down. It was time for them to face the truth, not just about me, but about themselves. The next time they called me a failure, I would be ready, and I would have the receipts to prove them wrong. A few days later, a strange phone call from my father set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of my family's life. He called me in the middle of the workday, something he rarely did. His voice was strained, unusually hesitant. "Megan, it's your father." "Hi, Dad, is everything okay?" I asked, a sense of unease creeping over me. "Yes, yes, everything's fine," he said a little too quickly. I was wondering if you could lend me some money. I was stunned into silence. My parents had always been proud, almost stubbornly so, about their financial independence. They had never asked me for money before. In fact, they had often made passive-aggressive comments about my own spending habits, implying that I was frivolous with my hard-earned income. "Money?" I finally managed to say. "How much?" "Just a few hundred," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "To tide us over until the end of the month. Things are a little tight right now." Something about his tone, the way he was trying to downplay the situation, set off alarm bells in my head. A few $100s, it didn't seem like enough to warrant such a furtive, anxious phone call. "Dad, what's going on?" I pressed, my voice firm. "You can tell me." He sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "It's just, things have been difficult since the layoff. The severance package is gone, and the pension isn't what we thought it would be. And Mom doesn't know you're calling me, does she?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," he admitted, his voice thick with shame. "She'd be mortified. She likes to keep up appearances, you know." I knew all too well. My mother's obsession with maintaining the illusion of a perfect, prosperous life was legendary. It was why they still lived in the sprawling suburban house I had grown up in, even though it was far too big for just the two of them. It was why she insisted on hosting elaborate holiday dinners, even when they couldn't afford it. It was why Ryan was still living at home, a 28-year-old man-child with no job and no prospects, because to admit that he was struggling would be to admit that they had failed. "I'll send you the money, Dad," I said, my mind already racing, "but I think we need to have a real conversation about this, all of us." I know," he said, his voice filled with a desperate relief. "Thank you, Megan. You're a good daughter." His words, which once would have filled me with a warm glow of pride, now left a bitter taste in my mouth. A good daughter? Was that all I was to him, a safety net, a last resort? That evening, I transferred the money to my father's bank account, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only scratching the surface of a much larger problem. I started digging, pulling up old bank statements, credit card bills, anything that could give me a clearer picture of their financial situation. What I found was far worse than I had imagined. They were drowning in debt. There were maxed out credit cards, a second mortgage on the house, and a series of high-interest personal loans. They were living on borrowed time, shuffling money from one account to another, barely staying afloat. The layoff had been the final straw, the event that had sent their carefully constructed house of cards tumbling down. But the most shocking discovery was the amount of money they had been giving to Ryan. There were regular, substantial transfers to his bank account, payments for art supplies and gallery fees and living expenses. They were bleeding themselves dry to fund his fantasy of being a famous artist, while their own financial security crumbled around them. The anger that had been simmering inside me since that disastrous dinner now erupted into a full-blown inferno. It wasn't just the lies, the deception. It was the sheer, breathtaking injustice of it all. They had called me a failure, a disappointment, while they were secretly bankrupting themselves to support my successful brother. They had criticized my career choices, my lifestyle, my very essence, while I was the only one in the family who was actually financially responsible, the only one who had a real future. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a new, unwavering resolve. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront them, not just with the truth about their finances, but with the truth about their treatment of me. I had to show them the real cost of their choices, the real price of their favoritism. I spent the next few days gathering my evidence, printing out bank statements, highlighting credit card bills, creating a detailed spreadsheet that laid out their financial ruin in stark, undeniable detail. I also found the receipts for the money I had given them over the years, the loans that were never paid back, the gifts that were always expected. It was a paper trail of my silent, unacknowledged contributions to their lives, a testament to my role as the family's unsung hero, their secret savior. As I compiled my dossier of disappointment, I felt a sense of power, a feeling I had rarely experienced in my family. I was no longer the little girl, desperate for their approval. I was a woman, a successful, independent woman, and I held all the cards. The next time I saw them, there would be no more polite small talk, no more biting my tongue. There would only be the truth, cold, hard, and unforgiving. And they would have no choice but to listen. My opportunity for a confrontation came sooner than I expected. My mother called me a week later, her voice once again radiating a forced, brittle cheerfulness. Megan, darling. Your father and I were thinking, it's been a while since we had a proper family day. We're having a barbecue on Sunday. Ryan's going to be there, of course. He has some exciting news to share. I could almost hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. And you'd better be on your best behavior. I'll be there, I said, my voice cool and even. When I arrived on Sunday, the scene was a perfect tableau of suburban denial. My father was at the grill flipping burgers with a pained, forced smile. My mother was flitting around the patio, arranging flowers and chattering about the weather. And Ryan was lounging in a lawn chair, a beer in his hand, a smug, self-satisfied expression on his face. The exciting news, it turned out, was that the downtown gallery had agreed to feature one of his paintings in a group exhibition. It wasn't a solo show, not even close, but my parents were treating it like he had just won the Turner Prize. We're so proud of you, son, my father said, clapping Ryan on the back. All your hard work is finally paying off. It's just the beginning, Ryan said, taking a long swig of his beer. This is going to be my year. I can feel it. I watched them, a knot of disgust tightening in my stomach. The charade was almost too much to bear. Here they were, celebrating a minor, insignificant achievement while their lives were falling apart at the seams. After lunch, as my mother was clearing the table, I knew it was time. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and pulled the folder out of my bag. I placed it on the patio table with a quiet thud. What's this? My mother asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. It's a reality check, I said, my voice clear and steady. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the state of this family. I opened the folder, revealing the spreadsheets, the bank statements, the credit card bills. I watched as their faces went from confusion to shock to a pale, ashen horror. My father sank into a chair, his face in his hands. My mother stood frozen, her hand flying to her mouth. Ryan just stared, his smug expression finally wiped from his face. How did you get this? My mother whispered, her voice trembling. Dad called me, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. He asked me for money. He told me things were tight, but he didn't tell me the whole story, did he? I walked them through it, page by page, number by number. I showed them the second mortgage, the maxed out credit cards, the high interest loans. I showed them the thousands of dollars they had poured into Ryan's art career, the money that could have been used to pay down their debt to secure their future. You're broke, I said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. You're on the verge of losing this house, the house you've lived in for 30 years, the house you raised us in. My mother started to cry, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. My father just sat there, a broken man, the weight of his lies finally crushing him, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out another set of papers, the receipts for the money I had given them over the years. The $5,000 for the new roof, the $3,000 for the furnace, the $10,000 to cover my father's medical bills after his heart scare, and of course the recent loan of a few $100s. And this, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I could no longer contain, this is what I've been doing while you've been calling me a failure. This is what I've been doing while you've been praising your successful son. I've been keeping you afloat. I've been the responsible one, the one who has been secretly bailing you out time and time again. I turned to Ryan, who was now staring at me with a mixture of fear and resentment. And you, I said, my voice dripping with contempt, you've been living a lie. You're not a struggling artist. You're a freeloader, a parasite, feeding off our parents' delusion, draining them of their life savings. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, Ryan was speechless. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the chirping of the birds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the sound of a family falling apart. The truth was out, ugly and undeniable, and there was no going back. The barbecue was over, the celebration was canceled, the party was well and truly over. I stood up, gathering my papers, my hands trembling slightly. I'm not doing it anymore, I said, my voice low and determined. I'm not your safety net, I'm not your secret savior, I'm done. I walked away, leaving them there in the ruins of their shattered lives. I didn't look back, I didn't need to. I knew what I would see, 3 people trapped in a prison of their own making, finally forced to confront the consequences of their choices. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph, not yet. I just felt a profound, aching sadness. Sadness for the family I had always wanted, the family I had never had. And sadness for the little girl who had tried so hard for so long to be loved. In the days that followed the disastrous barbecue, a strange, unsettling silence descended upon our family. There were no angry phone calls, no tearful recriminations. It was as if a bomb had gone off and we were all just sitting in the rubble, too stunned to speak. I used the time to reflect, to piece together the fragments of my past, to understand how we had arrived at this broken place. I went through my old financial records, not just the recent ones, but records stretching back years to the very beginning of my career. And as I did, a clearer, more painful picture began to emerge. It started small. A few $100s here and there to help with a car repair or an unexpected bill. Just until we get back on our feet, my mother would say, her voice laced with a carefully calibrated mixture of gratitude and guilt. And I, eager to please, eager to be the good daughter, would always say yes. But as the years went on, the requests became more frequent, the amounts larger. There was the $5,000 for the new roof, a loan that was never repaid. There was the $3,000 for the new furnace, a gift that was presented as my duty. There was the $10,000 to cover my father's medical bills, a contribution that was never acknowledged, never even mentioned again. And then there was the big one, the one that I had almost managed to forget, the one that now made my blood run cold. It was 2 years ago, just after my father's layoff. He had called me in a panic, his voice choked with a desperate, raw fear I had never heard before. They were behind on their mortgage payments, he confessed. The bank was threatening to foreclose. They were going to lose the house. I didn't hesitate. I went to my bank the next day and took out a personal loan for $61,000. It was a huge sum of money, a significant financial risk. But I couldn't bear the thought of my parents being homeless, of losing the home they had worked so hard for, the home that held all of our memories, good and bad. I transferred the money to their account and they were able to save the house. But there was no grand gesture of gratitude, no tearful thank you. There was just a quiet, almost resentful acceptance. It was as if my help was an embarrassment, a reminder of their failure. They never spoke of it again. And I, out of a misguided sense of loyalty, of filial duty, had allowed them to bury the truth. But now, looking at the loan documents, the transfer receipts, the paper trail of my sacrifice, I felt a surge of righteous anger. $61,000. I had put myself in debt, had compromised my own financial future to save them from the consequences of their own reckless spending, their own blind favoritism. And what had I gotten in return? I had been called a failure, I had been belittled, dismissed, and ignored. I had been treated as an afterthought, a convenient ATM, a silent, uncomplaining source of support. The injustice of it all was staggering. It was a betrayal that went beyond words, beyond comprehension. It was a wound that would never fully heal. I thought about all the things I could have done with that money. I could have put a down payment on my own house. I could have traveled the world. I could have invested in my own future instead of propping up their crumbling past. But I hadn't. I had chosen them. I had chosen my family, and they had chosen Ryan. The sadness I had felt after the barbecue was now replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had been a fool, a willing participant in my own exploitation. But no more. I would not be their victim. I would not be their scapegoat. I would not be their secret savior. I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. I explained the situation, the personal loan, the lack of a formal agreement, the years of unacknowledged financial support. He listened patiently, then gave me his honest assessment. It would be a difficult case, he said. Family matters always were, but I had a paper trail, I had evidence, I had a chance. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The road ahead would be long and difficult, I knew. It would mean severing ties, burning bridges, and possibly losing my family for good. But for the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. I was fighting for myself, for my future, for the respect I deserved. The next time I saw my parents, it wouldn't be at a family dinner, it wouldn't be at a holiday gathering. It would be across a courtroom with lawyers by our sides. The quiet, accommodating daughter was gone. In her place was a woman who was no longer afraid to speak her truth, to demand what was rightfully hers. The battle for my future had just begun, and I was ready to fight. The letter from my lawyer arrived at their house on a Wednesday. It was a formal, unemotional document outlining my intention to seek repayment for the $61,000 loan as well as the other, smaller amounts I had given them over the years. It was a declaration of war, a final, irrevocable severing of ties. The phone call came that evening. It was my mother, her voice a shrill, hysterical shriek. "How could you do this to us, Megan, after everything we've done for you? Were your parents, you're trying to destroy us?" I listened calmly, the years of pent-up anger and frustration giving me a strange, almost preternatural sense of clarity. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cold and even. "You did this to yourselves, I'm just cleaning up the mess." She sputtered, speechless with rage. "You're a monster," she finally managed to say, her voice dripping with venom. An ungrateful, selfish monster. And you're a liar and a hypocrite, I shot back, the words coming easily, effortlessly. You called me a failure while I was secretly paying your mortgage. You praised your golden boy son while he was bankrupting you. Don't talk to me about gratitude. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It was done. The final bridge had been burned. There was no going back. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and tense, acrimonious negotiations. My parents predictably denied everything. They claimed the $61,000 was a gift, a generous gesture from a loving daughter. They painted me as a bitter, resentful woman, jealous of her brother's talent, trying to extort money from her own flesh and blood. But I had the receipts, I had the bank statements, I had the paper trail of my sacrifice, and slowly, painstakingly, the truth began to emerge. The climax came in a stuffy, windowless conference room during a mediation session. My parents, my brother, and I sat on opposite sides of a long, polished table, our lawyers flanking us like soldiers in a war. The air was thick with a palpable, suffocating tension. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, laid out my case with a calm, methodical precision. She presented the evidence, the documents, the timeline of my financial contributions. She painted a picture of a daughter who had been exploited, manipulated, and emotionally abused. My parents' lawyer, a blustering, red-faced man who seemed to be sweating profusely, tried to poke holes in her argument, but it was no use. The evidence was irrefutable, the numbers didn't lie. And then Sarah played her trump card. It was a voicemail message saved on my phone for 2 years, a message I had almost forgotten I had. It was from my father, from the day he had called me in a panic, begging me for the money to save the house. His voice, raw with desperation and fear, filled the silent conference room. "Megan, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I don't know what we're going to do. The bank, they're going to take the house. We have nowhere to go. Please, you're our only hope. I'll pay you back, I swear." Every penny. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother stared at my father, her face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He just sat there, his head bowed in shame, a broken, defeated man. And in that moment, I knew I had won. Not just the legal battle, but the moral one as well. The truth, in all its ugly, undeniable glory, was finally out in the open. The mediation ended quickly after that. My parents, faced with the undeniable evidence of their deceit, had no choice but to agree to my terms. They would sell the house that had been the source of so much pride and so much pain, and use the proceeds to pay me back. They would also be legally obligated to repay the other, smaller loans with interest. As we filed out of the conference room, I saw my family for what they truly were. Three small, broken people stripped of their illusions, their lies, their self-deception. My mother shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. My father just looked old and tired. And Ryan. He just looked lost, a little boy who had suddenly been forced to grow up. I didn't feel a sense of triumph or even satisfaction. I just felt a profound, aching emptiness. I had won, but I had lost my family. The price of justice, I realized, was higher than I had ever imagined. The house sold quickly, the market being what it was. I received a check from the escrow company a few weeks later for the full amount of my loan plus interest. I deposited it in my bank account, a quiet, anticlimactic end to a long and painful chapter of my life. I never heard from my parents again. They moved into a small, rented apartment in a neighboring town, their lives downsized, their dreams diminished. I saw a picture of them once on a mutual friend's social media page. They looked older, smaller, their faces etched with a bitterness that seemed to have settled deep into their bones. Ryan, stripped of his financial support system, was forced to get a real job. He ended up working in a coffee shop, his dreams of being a famous artist gathering dust in a rented storage unit. I heard through the grapevine that he was angry, resentful, that he blamed me for ruining his life. But I didn't care. His life was his own to ruin. I was no longer responsible for his choices. As for me, I used the money to put a down payment on a small condo of my own, a bright, sunny space that was all mine. I filled it with books and plants and art that I loved, creating a sanctuary, a place of peace and solitude. The scars of my past were still there, of course. They were a part of me, a reminder of the battles I had fought, the losses I had endured, but they no longer defined me. I was more than my family's scapegoat, more than their secret savior. I was a survivor. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into my work, finding a sense of purpose and fulfillment in the bridges I built, the structures I designed. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I even started dating again, slowly, cautiously, learning to trust, to open myself up to the possibility of love. One day, about a year after the lawsuit, I was having coffee with a friend when she asked me a question that took me by surprise. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked, her voice gentle, her eyes filled with a genuine, compassionate curiosity. I thought for a moment, stirring my latte, watching the foam swirl and dance. Did I miss the constant criticism, the backhanded compliments, the suffocating weight of their expectations? Did I miss the feeling of being invisible, of being taken for granted, of being the last resort? No, I said, and I was surprised by the certainty in my voice. I don't miss them. I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the idea of a family, but the reality was something else entirely. And in that moment, I knew I was truly free. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful acceptance. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. And that, I realized, was a victory far more valuable than any amount of money. I had built a new life for myself, a life on my own terms, a life of my own design. And it was a life that was strong, stable, and true, a life that could withstand any storm. I had finally become the architect of my own happiness, the engineer of my own soul. And the future, for the first time in a long time, looked bright and full of possibility.